Neil, there's a conflict in Syria, as we all know, and all over the internet, wherever I go, I see ads. Help Syria now. I don't really trust those ads, but
No.
it looks like a parallel with Libya. It looks like a NATO-inspired operation. Would that be a correct assessment?
In my opinion, yes, certainly. It's what would be referred to as a proxy war. Essentially, when we're looking at Syria, we need to have a look at a couple of things. Who is Al-Qaeda and who is the Muslim Brotherhood? I mean, the first thing that we need to sort of address is the fact that the rebels who are calling themselves the Free Syrian Army, which is remarkably close to the Free Libyan Army, which is also essentially supported by the Western powers, they are committing atrocities. It's very, very similar to the Phoenix program, which was conducted by the American military against the civilian population of Vietnam, essentially causing atrocities to terrorize the population and lower the morale. And then obviously they become more malleable and don't really want to fight. What's interesting is that the media have been absolutely 100% complicit in spinning the story, so this has been reported as Assad's troops causing these atrocities, as opposed to the truth, which appears to be that it is actually the rebels. So that essentially what we're looking at is we're looking at a destabilization of the entire region, so that the Western ends can be brought into it. So what we're using what is called Al-Qaeda in these conflicts. Now, Al-Qaeda is essentially a fake offshoot from the Mujahideen. Now, the Mujahideen were Islamist fighters in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and places like that were used during the Cold War to fight against the encroaching Russian oppression of the Cold War, which was another fake construct. Now, the concept of Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda actually means the list, the database, or it actually means the toilet, depending on what colloquial translation you want to actually use. Now, the concept, again, that's presented in the Western media is that Al-Qaeda operate very much like Spectre, which is the bad guys in James Bond, or Thrush, the bad guys in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and that they have a sort of militarized structure of command, and they meet in hollowed-out volcanoes, and they've got this organization that is out to destroy the Western world and everything that we actually stand for. And this is not true. This is again, Al Qaeda was initially, I believe it was Dick Cheney that gave the name. It was, I believe, it was in Somalia. There was they wanted to frame a couple of fundamentalist Islamists for blowing up an embassy in Somalia, and so what they did to tie them in was we created this concept called Al Qaeda, and then basically said, right, you're a member of Al Qaeda, you're a member of Al Qaeda. This is a terrorist organization, and then we can accuse you of any crime that this group has done. After that, it became basically a very convenient bogeyman. Now got this concept, we've got a construct of Al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization, and we present it in the Western media that this is the guys that are attacking the Western world. It was Al Jazeera and the BBC which basically always showed the fake Osama bin Laden videos and the fake confessions to being involved in 9/11 and stuff like that. And time and time again, the so-called top brass of Al-Qaeda have been exposed to be CIA. Even Osama bin Laden, his real name was Tim Osman, he was a CIA agent. Now, what actually Al-Qaeda are, again, the term is used, but what essentially they are is a loose-knit community of mercenaries that can be used in any situation. In Africa, they're being used in Mali to destabilize the region. They were used very expertly in Yugoslavia to destabilize the region because, again, that was preventing the onset of the European Union. And then they were used in Libya, and then they were also used in Syria at present. Now, what you get with Al-Qaeda essentially was made up in the first place. Then you get certain elements which are actually just pure CIA agents that are going there and rounding people up and saying, hey, we're part of Al-Qaeda, why don't you come and join us and fight the West? And then you also get this, it's quite complicated because you get this sort of secondary group of people who claim affiliation to Al-Qaeda as a response to what they see as Western oppression. But they've never been in touch with anybody that would be considered an Al-Qaeda top brass or something like that. They just take on board that identity, and then they're essentially useful idiots because they're going and blowing themselves up in places like Iraq, in places like Libya, feeling that they're actually fighting Western oppression when in fact they're not. And the best analogy for that is like, you've got the Blood and the Crips gangs in America, and basically they were both founded in Los Angeles, but you've got offshoots all over the place. And essentially what that is some group of kids that's picked up a blue or a red bandana and said, we are now Bloods or we are now Crips. They've got no affiliation to the Pyrus or Tookie Williams or any of the sort of actual fundamental construction of it, but they're claiming that because they feel that represents their ideology. And so this is what you've got. You've basically got the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a destabilizing fundamentalist group founded by the CIA and MI6 and Mossad. And an offshoot of them, which is Al-Qaeda, which is, again, a CIA-founded fake construct that draws in people to fight against Western oppression. And it acts as a bogeyman, and it also acts as a sort of proxy army to go in there and do what we want to do. And what's interesting is that basically the journalism is blind to this. One moment they're saying that Al-Qaeda is the worst thing in the world. Then basically they're saying that actually, well, they're calling them the rebels in Syria. They're ignoring the fact that Al-Qaeda flags, because as I say, this concept has now been taken on as a real ideology, are being flown in Libya and in Syria and all of these things. And then when we go back to Mali, all of a sudden it's Al-Qaeda, the bad guys, and so we need to send our troops into there. So essentially the whole thing is just a very, very clever psychological operation, but it's not new. As I said, we've done this before, like with the Phoenix program was there, training rebels to be monstrous in Honduras, training people to be monstrous in South America, and Nicaragua and people like that, creating these bad guys so that we can then have an excuse to go in and save the world. And what we're really doing is we're stopping secularization, because we don't want any country that could be seen as a threat to this sort of globalization. I mean, Syria, essentially, the thing about Syria is that it's vital for Syria to be free so that Israel is to attack Iran, because Iran is one of these last few nations that is basically, at least in public perception, refusing to kowtow to the sort of Western sort of globalization. Whether this is true, whether this is a role that's being played by Iran, because we mustn't forget, we set up Iran, we ousted Mossadegh, we put the Shah back in, we organized all of these enemies, the best against, like, go and watch Bill Hicks, we're like the bad guy in Shane. We arm these people so that we can then go and murder them, and then we can proclaim ourselves to be liberating freedom fighters, which is bizarrely exactly the way that the rebels have been presented.